They called it the safest street in Dunsfield. Maple Street, where neighbors watched each other's kids, where headlights of passing cars painted golden stripes on sleeping bedrooms. But in the summer of 1995, something happened that fractured that illusion forever. 3 children vanished, and the truth was buried deeper than their names. The forest can keep secrets for decades. Roots grow over evidence, leaves blanket footprints, and time erodes memory. Until something breaks the silence. On a misty morning in 2025, the earth finally gave up what it had been hiding. Construction workers clearing land for a new hiking trail extension found a small metal box, rusted but intact, and beside it something more disturbing, bone fragments emerging from the soil like terrible flowers. The forest had preserved this evidence for 30 years, waiting for someone to uncover the story it contained. The box was marked Summer 1995 in faded ink, a time capsule from the darkest chapter in Dunsfield's history. As police tape cordoned off the area and forensic teams descended upon the scene, Detective Sarah Vale made the call she had been preparing for her entire career, a call to Laura McConnell, who had waited 30 years to learn what happened to her children on that warm August evening when they rode their bikes around the corner and vanished from Maple Street forever. What if the most ordinary neighborhood could hide something unimaginable? What if the real danger was never lurking in the dark woods, but was hiding in plain sight, waving hello from a familiar porch? Summer in Dunsfield, 1995. The air smells of freshly cut grass and barbecue smoke. Sprinklers trace lazy arcs across front lawns. Children's laughter bounces between houses on Maple Street, where everyone knows everyone's name and no one locks their doors. Laura McConnell stands at her kitchen sink, watching through the window as her children, Tyler, 11, and Anna, 8, race their bikes up and down the sidewalk with their friend Ryan Cobb. The late afternoon sun catches in their hair as they pedal past Frank Delaney's house. Frank, a retired night watchman, sits on his porch swing as he does most evenings, raising his hand in a friendly wave when he notices Laura watching. She waves back, a reflexive neighborly gesture. Inside, Laura checks the clock. Derek won't be home from his shift at the paper mill until after the children are in bed, again. She makes a mental note to save him a plate. This has become their routine. Ships passing in the night, connected by notes on the refrigerator and the warmth left on his side of the bed. "Mom, can we go to the cul-de-sac?" Tyler calls through the screen door. "Just for a little bit before dinner?" Laura hesitates. The cul-de-sac borders the forest edge, just out of view from their house. "Be back in 30 minutes, she calls, "and put your bikes away in the garage when you get home." As the children pedal away, Laura notices Anna, hanging back, uncharacteristically quiet. The little girl has been withdrawn lately, claiming she doesn't want to play the special games anymore. Laura makes a mental note to talk with her about it after dinner. She assumes it's just normal childhood squabbles. The kind that seem monumental at 8 years old but are forgotten by morning. This is the last ordinary moment Laura McConnell will ever know, standing in her kitchen, planning a family dinner, watching her children disappear around the corner of Maple Street with a promise to return in 30 minutes. A promise that will echo through 30 years of empty rooms and unanswered questions. 30 minutes pass. Then, 45. Laura stands on the front porch, calling their names into the gathering darkness. At first, there's irritation. They know better than to be late for dinner. But irritation gives way to concern as the street lights flicker on, and there's still no sign of Tyler, Anna, or Ryan. By 8 o'clock, Laura has called Ryan's parents. By 8:30, neighbors emerge from their homes with flashlights. By 9, Frank Delaney is organizing search parties, directing people with the authority of someone who has handled emergencies before. His calm efficiency is reassuring as panic begins to bloom in Laura's chest. "They probably just lost track of time," Frank tells her, his hand steady on her shoulder. Kids do that in summer. We'll find them playing somewhere, completely unaware of the commotion they've caused. But his confident prediction proves hollow when someone finds the bicycles at the forest edge. 3 bikes carefully propped against a tree with kickstands engaged, not thrown down in haste or abandoned in fear, but deliberately placed. Beside them in the grass lies Tyler's watch, its face cracked, hands frozen at 6:17. Police arrive with floodlights that cut through the dark forest. Search dogs strain at their leashes, circling the bicycles, but losing the scent just yards into the trees, as if the children simply vanished into thin air. As midnight approaches, Laura stands clutching her children's jackets, paralyzed by a fear so profound it hollows her from the inside out. I saw a car I didn't recognize parked near the cul-de-sac earlier, a neighbor mentions to a police officer. Dark sedan, couldn't see who was driving? It's the first suggestion that what happened on Maple Street might not have been a tragic accident, that something more deliberate, more predatory, has entered their safe haven. As the realization ripples through the gathering crowd, Maple Street's sense of security crumbles, like sand washed away by a rising tide. Evil didn't come roaring through the dark that night. It had been there all along, hiding behind neighborly smiles and friendly waves. Dawn breaks over Maple Street, casting long shadows that stretch like accusing fingers toward the forest. Exhausted search parties return with nothing to show for their efforts. Police officers take statements while volunteers distribute missing persons flyers. 3 school photographs smiling from a single page under bold letters asking, "Have you seen these children?" Laura and Derek sit side by side on their porch, neither speaking nor touching. Neighbors come bearing casseroles and platitudes, food no one will eat and comfort no one can feel. The mechanical rituals of crisis play out as the McConnells exist, in suspended animation, waiting for the moment when their real lives can resume. The search dogs have failed. They lose the scent at the forest edge, suggesting the children never walked deeper into the woods, at least not on their own. A child's shoe, identified as Anna's, is found 100 yards in, placed atop a fallen log as if deliberately left to be discovered. Ryan's cassette recorder, the one he carried everywhere, recording bird calls and secret messages, is conspicuously absent. Did anyone notice anything unusual yesterday? Detective Carl Mendez asks the gathered neighbors. Any strangers in the area? Any unexpected visitors? Frank's garage was open pretty late, someone mentions. I noticed when I was walking my dog around 9. Frank Delaney shakes his head. I was looking for better flashlights for the search, he explains. Thought I had some camping equipment that might help. As day 1 of the search ends without answers, Detective Mendez kneels beside the children's bicycles, still where they were found the previous night. He runs his fingers over the handlebars, frowning. These have been arranged, he murmurs to his partner. Look how carefully they've been placed, all 3 kickstands down, handlebars aligned. Someone wanted us to find these bikes, he adds, looking toward the silent forest, but not the children. The first sign that something calculated, something patient, had been waiting for its moment on Maple Street. 1 week passes, and Maple Street has transformed. News vans line the once quiet road. Police tape flutters in summer breezes, and neighbors who once shared barbecues now eye each other with veiled suspicion. The McConnells' living room has become the unofficial headquarters of the search, walls covered with maps and photographs. Derek McConnell paces the floor like a caged animal, sleep-deprived and volatile. Rumors begin to circulate about his temper, about arguments overheard through open windows in the weeks before the disappearance, about his convenient late shifts that meant he wasn't home when his children vanished. Frank Delaney has become a fixture in the McConnell home, organizing searchers, fielding calls from volunteers, bringing food and coffee. His steady presence seems to be the only thing keeping the operation running as Laura moves through her days like a ghost, touching her children's belongings as if they might contain some clue to their whereabouts. "I heard crying," a neighbor finally admits to police, 7 days after the disappearance, "from the woods, the night they went missing. I thought it was just kids playing, so I didn't investigate or call anyone. I keep thinking, what if it was them? What if I could have helped?" Small revelations accumulate like debris after a flood. Ryan's younger brother, Elliot, only 3 years old, repeatedly mentions the man with the camera when asked about his missing brother, but can't identify who he means. A teenage girl recalls seeing Tyler arguing with an adult near the cul-de-sac the week before, but can't remember who it was. Maple Street residents begin locking their doors for the first time. Parents no longer allow their children to play unsupervised. The community is fracturing under pressure. Bonds of trust dissolving as everyone wonders, if 3 children could vanish from the safest street in Dunsfield, is anyone truly safe? And worse, is the monster who took them still walking among them, watching their fear grow? As Laura pins another flyer to a community board, she notices Frank Delaney watching her from his truck. He offers a sympathetic smile before driving away. But something about his gaze lingers uncomfortably. A look not of shared grief, but of something more complex that she can't quite name. The first crack in the foundation of trust that will eventually collapse entirely. 2 weeks after the disappearance, the police presence has diminished, but not disappeared. Detective Mendez has set up an informal office in the Dunsfield police station, walls covered with photographs, timelines, and statements. His focus has shifted from the forest to Maple Street itself. "We've been looking at this all wrong," he tells his partner. "We've been searching for a stranger who came to Maple Street that day, but what if it wasn't a stranger at all? What if it was someone the children knew and trusted?" Background checks reveal Frank Delaney's previous employment as a night watchman at a now-closed youth detention facility, a detail he never mentioned in casual conversation with neighbors. A search of Derek McConnell's work locker uncovers a hidden bottle of whiskey and a small child's bracelet later determined not to belong to either of his children. In Anna's bedroom, investigators find a diary tucked between her mattress and box spring. The most recent entry, written 3 days before she vanished, contains a cryptic reference. "I told Tyler I don't want to play in the special place anymore. He says we have to, or they'll be mad." When detectives quietly interview other children from Maple Street, several mention Frank Delaney offering them rides home and special treats when parents weren't around. One boy describes being invited into Frank's garage to see his special camera collection, but feeling uncomfortable and making an excuse to leave. Detective Mendez places photographs of Frank Delaney and Derek McConnell side by side on his board, drawing a circle connecting them both to the cul-de-sac where the bikes were found. "Sometimes," he tells his partner, "it's not strangers we should fear most. Sometimes it's the faces we see every day." The warning signs were there all along. A too helpful neighbor, a father working convenient late shifts, children with secrets they couldn't articulate. But no one connected these dots until it was too late, until 3 empty bicycles stood at the edge of a silent forest. 6 months after the children's disappearance, Maple Street has settled into a new normal of quiet grief. The McConnell house has become a mausoleum of frozen time, bedrooms preserved exactly as they were left, school assignments still pinned to the refrigerator, bicycles that will never again be ridden stored carefully in the garage. Derek McConnell has become increasingly erratic, drinking heavily, spending long hours in the unfinished basement, and avoiding search updates. Laura watches her husband become a stranger before her eyes, his grief manifesting as rage one moment and complete emotional shutdown the next. When detectives revisit the timeline of that August evening, Derek repeatedly changes his story about his whereabouts. First, he was working late at the paper mill. Then, he left early, but stopped for groceries. Then, he was actually at a bar but didn't want to admit it. Each version contradicts the last, each explanation more convoluted. Late one night, Laura comes downstairs to find Derek on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. He hangs up immediately when she enters the room. The caller ID shows Frank Delaney's number. When she asks Derek about it the next morning, he claims Frank was just updating him on search efforts. At 2 in the morning. The basement project Derek started for the children, a recreation room that was supposed to be finished by Christmas, sits abandoned, plastic sheeting hanging from exposed beams. When Laura suggests they either complete it or remove the painful reminder, Derek becomes inexplicably agitated. "Just leave it alone," he snaps. "Leave everything alone." One night, Laura wakes to the smell of smoke. She finds Derek in the backyard, burning papers in the fire pit. He claims they're just old work documents, but when she retrieves a partially burned page after he goes inside, she finds what appears to be a list of dates and initials that mean nothing to her. After a particularly intense argument about the basement, Derek drives away in the middle of the night. The next morning, his car is found abandoned near the same forest edge where the children's bikes were discovered. Another disappearance from Maple Street that deepens the mystery rather than resolving it. Police search the forest again but find no trace of Derek McConnell. The prevailing theory becomes suicide, a father unable to bear the weight of his children's unsolved disappearance. But no body is ever found, and Laura is left with questions that multiply rather than diminish with time. Was her husband's descent into erratic behavior caused by grief or guilt? Was he a victim of the same predator who took their children, or was he somehow involved? The basement sits unfinished, a silent witness to secrets Derek took with him into the night. With Derek now missing and presumed dead, the investigation into the children's disappearance loses momentum. The case grows cold as detectives are reassigned, witnesses move away, and public interest fades. Laura McConnell remains in the house on Maple Street, suspended between grief for her children and confusion over her husband's disappearance. Frank Delaney has become her unexpected support system, bringing groceries, maintaining her yard, keeping her company through long evenings of grief. His consistent presence seems like the only stability in her shattered world. When other neighbors gradually distance themselves, uncomfortable with the reminder of tragedy, Frank remains steadfast. "You're not alone, Laura," he tells her. "I promised Derek I would look after you if anything ever happened to him. I intend to keep that promise." But behind his compassionate facade, troubling patterns emerge. Frank's house is meticulously organized, with a locked room he refers to as his photography studio that no one is permitted to enter. He displays an unusual knowledge of police investigation details not shared with the public. Several neighborhood children have stopped visiting Laura's house when they notice Frank's truck in the driveway. In his own home, Frank has collected newspaper clippings of the case in a detailed scrapbook he keeps hidden beneath other albums. He knows the timeline of the children's last known movements with a precision that goes beyond what was reported in the press. He speaks of Tyler, Anna, and Ryan with a familiarity that suggests he knew them far better than a casual neighbor should have. One evening, as Laura thanks Frank for his continued support, she notices a familiar cassette tape on his counter, identical to the kind Ryan Cobb always carried in his recorder. When she mentions it, Frank's friendly demeanor shifts subtly as he quickly puts the tape in his pocket. "Just an old recording of bird calls," he explains with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "From my walks in the forest." The first moment, Laura feels a chill of doubt about the man who has positioned himself as her protector. The first time she wonders if the predator who took her children hasn't been walking beside her all along, watching her grief with hidden satisfaction. The night watchman, who spent his career observing others, has been hiding in plain sight, wearing the mask of the helpful neighbor while collecting the remnants of his crimes like trophies. 5 years after the disappearances, Dunsfield has largely moved on. New families have moved to Maple Street, unaware of its history or choosing to ignore it. The community has constructed a narrative that allows them to continue, framing the tragedy as a random act of violence by an unknown drifter rather than confronting more disturbing possibilities. Original witness statements that mentioned seeing the children enter a neighbor's garage were later retracted, witnesses claiming they must have been mistaken. The police file shows evidence of testimonies that were changed or amended weeks after initial interviews. The local newspaper stopped covering the anniversary of the disappearance after the second year, editors citing community healing as their justification. Frank Delaney has become a respected community figure, organizing neighborhood watch programs and speaking at school assemblies about child safety. The irony goes unnoticed as he stands before parents, warning them about strangers with candy, while embodying the more insidious threat, the predator with community trust. When Dunsfield prepares to build a small memorial park for the lost children of Maple Street, the planning committee deliberately chooses a location across town rather than near the forest where they vanished, a physical manifestation of the community's desire to separate itself from the truth still hiding in those woods. It's better for everyone this way, the mayor explains at the dedication ceremony, a place for remembrance that doesn't overshadow the neighborhood's recovery. Collective amnesia becomes Dunsfield's self-preservation. No one mentions how quickly the original search teams disbanded, how eagerly they accepted the narrative of a random drifter rather than looking closer at one of their own. No one speaks of the inconsistencies in the initial investigation or the witnesses who changed their stories after conversations with Frank Delaney. The truth remains buried beneath layers of selective memory, convenient forgetting, and the human instinct to look away from darkness rather than confront it directly. Maple Street's tragedy becomes sanitized in community memory, a random act of violence rather than a betrayal from within. When evil wears a familiar face, it's easier to invent a monster than recognize the neighbor who waves hello each morning. 15 years after the disappearance, Laura McConnell has become a hollow version of herself, still living in the same house on Maple Street, surrounded by preserved bedrooms and fading photographs. Her friendship with Frank Delaney has become the center of her diminished world, his visits the only break in her isolation. She has stopped asking questions, stopped seeking answers, accepting the limbo of not knowing as her permanent state. Until the day she ventures into her long-abandoned basement, a pipe has burst, forcing her to confront the space Derek left unfinished all those years ago. As she surveys the water damage, she notices something odd about a section of drywall. It doesn't match the rest, seems newer, as if it was replaced after the original construction. When she presses against it, the section moves slightly. Using a hammer from Derek's old toolbox, she breaks through the drywall to find a hidden crawl space behind it. Inside, she discovers a metal box containing torn photographs, images she's never seen before. The photos show Frank Delaney watching neighborhood children from his porch and car, his expression intent in a way that makes Laura's skin crawl. A child's drawing shows 3 stick figures inside what appears to be a small building in the woods, the word help written across the top in a hand she recognizes as Anna's. Most damning of all, she finds Derek's journal with entries suggesting he had discovered something about Frank shortly before his disappearance. F has the tapes, says he'll destroy everything if I go to the police, says they'll blame me too. Maybe he's right. God forgive me for what I've done. God forgive me for what I didn't stop. Laura's hands shake as she holds these pieces of a 15-year-old puzzle when the doorbell rings. Frank Delaney stands on her porch with dinner, smiling the same patient smile he's offered for years. For the first time, she sees something predatory behind his kindness, something calculated in the way he's positioned himself in her life. The man she trusted most may be responsible for destroying everything she loved. The realization crashes over her like a wave, threatening to drown her in its horrific clarity. The neighbor who helped search for her children may have been the one who took them. The friend who comforted her after Derek's disappearance may have been responsible for his fate. And she has let this man into her home for 15 years, accepting his support, his company, his carefully constructed lies. Return to 2025. Detective Sarah Vale notifies Laura McConnell, now in her 60s, about the discovery in the forest. Laura arrives at the excavation site, her first time returning to the forest edge in decades. The scene contrasts the bustling activity of the forensic team with Laura's still, almost transcendent focus on the unearthed metal box. "We found this about 2 miles in," Vale explains gently. Construction crews uncovered it while clearing land for a new hiking trail. The remains appear to be consistent with 3 children, approximately aged 8 to 11. Laura nods, her expression unreadable. After 30 years of uncertainty, the forest has finally spoken. The metal box recovered alongside the remains contains Polaroid photographs of Tyler, Anna, and Ryan in what appears to be a small cabin, smiling in some images, fearful in others. Several cassette tapes are labeled with dates corresponding to the weeks before the disappearance. Most surprising is a journal in the box that details sessions with the children written in handwriting that doesn't match Frank Delaney's, handwriting Laura recognizes immediately as her husband's. "I need to hear the tapes," Laura says, her voice steady despite the revelation unfolding before her. Detective Vale hesitates but complies, playing the first cassette on a portable player. The recording captures children's voices, playing make-believe Tyler directing his sister and friend in some kind of game. Then another voice enters, an adult male suggesting a special game of hide-and-seek. Laura freezes, her expression shifting from grief to confusion, because the voice giving instructions isn't Frank Delaney's, but Derek's. "That's my husband," she whispers. "That's Derek's voice." The forest has yielded not just remains, but a terrible truth. The danger that claimed her children wasn't lurking in the shadows, but was present at their dinner table, living under the same roof. A betrayal so profound it defies comprehension. As the excavation continues, more evidence emerges. The children's clothing, preserved beneath the soil. A camera with undeveloped film. Small toys brought from home as comfort objects. Each item tells part of a story that has remained hidden for 3 decades, buried beneath layers of forest growth and community silence. The forest kept these secrets not to protect the predator, but to preserve the evidence until the world was ready to face the truth. Now that truth is emerging from the ground itself, impossible to deny or rebury. Detective Vale and Laura sit in the Dunsfield police station, surrounded by both the old case files and the new evidence. As they piece together the cassette recordings, photographs, and journal entries, a complex and disturbing picture emerges, one that implicates not just a single predator, but a relationship between Frank Delaney and Derek McConnell. "From what we can determine," Vale explains carefully, "Frank Delaney and your husband were collaborators. The recording suggests they were both present during what they called sessions with the children." Laura stares at the evidence spread across the table. Her husband's journal, Frank's photographs, the transcribed recordings. The terrible narrative they tell is clear. Derek's journal suggests an initial accident with Ryan followed by panic and a cover-up involving Frank. What began as a terrible mistake escalated into calculated violence when the other children witnessed what happened. "Derek writes here about wanting to confess," Vale says, indicating a journal entry dated 6 months after the disappearances. He mentions ending this nightmare and telling Laura everything regardless of the consequences. "And then he disappeared," Laura whispers, "just like the children." Evidence of other neighborhood children being brought to the cabin but returned home suggests the pattern predated the disappearances, that Frank and Derek had been grooming and abusing children for months or even years before the tragedy that claimed Tyler, Anna, and Ryan. Most chilling are the photographs matching property records for land once owned by Frank's family. A hunting cabin deep in another forest, miles from where searchers had focused their efforts. The truth had remained hidden not because it was well concealed, but because they had been looking in entirely the wrong place. "We've been blind," Laura says, her voice hollow. "All these years, I thought a monster took my children. But there were two monsters, and one of them was their father." The recording reveals Frank and Derek discussing what to do after Ryan's accidental death. Frank's calm, methodical voice, suggesting they can't leave witnesses, contrasted with Derek's increasing panic. It's clear which of the two was the leader, the experienced predator who knew how to cover his tracks. As Vale prepares to issue an arrest warrant for Frank Delaney, now in his 70s and still living on Maple Street, officers report his house has been emptied overnight. The predator, sensing the net closing and slipping away once again. For 30 years, this conspiracy of silence has protected the guilty. Now, even as the truth emerges, Frank Delaney has vanished like a ghost, leaving Laura to wonder if there will ever truly be justice for her children. With Frank Delaney now a fugitive, Detective Vale turns to an unexpected source of information: Elliot Cobb, Ryan's younger brother, now a man in his 30s. Though only 3 when his brother vanished, Elliot has carried fragmented memories that he spent decades trying to understand. "I never knew if they were real memories or things I imagined after hearing about what happened," Elliot explains in Vale's office. "But after all these years, some images have stayed consistent, too specific to be made up." Elliot remembers being in Frank's garage once with Ryan, seeing a door to a room filled with camera equipment. "Ryan told me it was a secret room where they played special games. He said I could come too when I was older, but I should never tell Mom and Dad." He recalls Frank and Derek arguing in hushed voices about going too far weeks before the disappearance. The men fell silent when they realized Elliot was nearby, Frank quickly offering him candy and sending him home. Most vividly, Elliot remembers his brother showing him a special coin Frank had given him for being good at keeping secrets. The coin, he recalls, had a forest engraved on one side and a cabin on the other, a token of belonging to something children were made to feel privileged to join. Using maps and Elliot's fragmented memories of overhearing conversations, Vale identifies locations in the forest photographs that haven't been searched, including a second cabin on land once belonging to Delaney's family, suggesting potential additional crime scenes. "There's something else," Elliot says hesitantly. "Something I never told anyone because it seemed impossible. The night before Ryan disappeared, he told me if anything happened to him, I should look in his special hiding place, a loose board under his bed. After he was gone, I found a cassette tape there with a label that said proof. But when I tried to show my parents, it was gone." The persistence of trauma and childhood memory. Fragments of truth carried for decades. Pieces that only make sense when finally assembled with others. Elliot's recollections, dismissed for years as the imagination of a traumatized child, now provide the map to finding Frank Delaney and uncovering the full extent of his crimes. Based on Elliot's memories, Vale organizes a new search of Frank's abandoned property, focusing on the garage foundation and a storage shed that was overlooked in previous investigations. Spaces that might hold answers about not just where Frank has gone, but where he might have taken other children over the years. The most heartbreaking aspect of Elliot's testimony is his certainty that people knew, that adults in the neighborhood had suspicions but chose not to see what was happening. The conspiracy of silence extended beyond the two predators to encompass an entire community willing to look away rather than confront the darkness in their midst. The garage revelation, Detective Vale leads a forensic team in dismantling Frank Delaney's garage. Layer by layer, they strip away the carefully maintained exterior to reveal modifications and hidden spaces. Laura watches from a distance, simultaneously needing to witness and struggling to process what each discovery suggests about the man who pretended to support her for decades. "The wall's been doubled," a technician calls out, measuring the interior dimensions against the exterior. "There's at least 3 feet of hidden space behind this section." When they break through the false wall, they find a small room containing photography equipment, child-sized furniture, and a tripod positioned to face a small couch. The implications are unmistakable. This was a staging area, a place where Frank documented his crimes before taking children to the more isolated cabin in the forest. Under the concrete floor, investigators discover a hidden compartment containing hundreds of photographs, not just of Tyler, Anna, and Ryan, but other neighborhood children over a period of years. Some images show children simply playing outside, unaware they're being photographed. Others are more disturbing, clearly taken in the hidden room or at the forest cabin. Most revealing is a hidden safe, containing documentation suggesting Derek McConnell was being blackmailed by Frank Delaney. Photographs showing Derek with children in compromising situations, followed by notes demanding his cooperation. What began as Derek's weakness became Frank's leverage, a way to ensure both his silence and his participation. "He trapped Derek," Laura whispers, not excusing her husband's actions, but finally understanding the dynamic that led to the tragedy. Frank found his vulnerability and exploited it, then used it to make him complicit. Among the discovered documents is a deed to another property, registered under a false name, but matching Frank Delaney's signature pattern, a remote cabin 50 miles north that isn't on any of the search maps. Vale realizes they've been looking in the wrong forest all along. The original search focused on the woods behind Maple Street, but the children were taken much farther away, to a property no one knew existed. The architecture of predation is revealed in the methodical construction of Delaney's garage, how calculated and patient his evil was, building its infrastructure within seemingly normal spaces while presenting a facade of respectability. For decades, he hid behind the identity of the helpful neighbor, the community volunteer, while constructing an elaborate system for capturing, controlling, and concealing his victims. As the forensic team continues their work, they uncover one more devastating piece of evidence: a shallow grave beneath the garage floor containing human remains. Initial examination suggests an adult male deceased approximately 30 years ago. Laura stares at the excavation, already knowing what DNA testing will later confirm. Derek McConnell never left Maple Street alive. The final betrayal in a cascade of horrors. Frank murdered her husband and then positioned himself as her supporter, watching her grief with hidden satisfaction for decades. The second forest. A convoy of police vehicles travels through dense woodland to reach the newly discovered property. The cabin sits in a clearing, weathered but intact, surrounded by 30 years of overgrowth. As officers approach with weapons drawn, it becomes clear the building has been recently occupied, smoke still rising from the chimney. "Frank Delaney," Vale calls through a megaphone. "This is the police. Come out with your hands visible." No response comes from the cabin. After securing the perimeter, tactical officers enter the structure, clearing it room by room before announcing it empty. Frank has fled, but not before leaving behind evidence of his continued obsession. The cabin interior reveals a carefully maintained shrine to the 3 missing children, photographs covering one wall, showing them in life and in death. Fresh food in the refrigerator suggests Frank fled here after learning about the forest discovery, perhaps gathering mementos before disappearing again. Most disturbing is a wall of surveillance photographs documenting Frank's continued observation of Maple Street and Laura over decades. Images of her at the grocery store, tending her garden, standing at her mailbox. The predator never truly left his hunting ground. He simply adapted his methods, watching from a distance while maintaining the illusion of having moved on. In the main room, a hidden trapdoor reveals stairs descending to a basement not shown in any property records. Officers clear the subterranean space, finding shelves of videotapes and journals documenting decades of predatory behavior, suggesting victims beyond those already known. Children whose disappearances may never have been connected to Frank Delaney. As officers clear the main floor, Detective Vale notices something scratched into the wooden floor near the trap door. What appears to be a child's desperate attempt to leave a message. She leans closer, flashlight revealing 3 sets of initials and a date from 30 years ago, followed by the words, "Not alone." They were alive when they were brought here, Vale tells Laura, who insisted on being present despite the psychological toll. They left this message. Your children and Ryan tried to leave evidence. The scratched message suggests not just the children's presence, but their awareness, their attempt to communicate with whoever might find them. Even in their fear, they tried to leave a trace, to tell their story. 30 years later, that message has finally been received. The second forest has yielded its secrets. Not just evidence of Frank Delaney's crimes against Tyler, Anna, and Ryan, but suggestions of a pattern spanning decades. A predator who moved methodically through generations of Dunsfield's children while the community remained blind to the danger in their midst. The basement of the cabin reveals the final pieces of the puzzle. Detective Vale and her team document the space while Laura, who insisted on being present, confronts the terrible truth of what happened to her children. The forest has kept its secrets for 30 years, but now everything is illuminated in the harsh light of investigation. Evidence suggests the children were initially brought to the cabin alive, possibly under the pretense of a special adventure. Derek's journal, found complete in a metal box matching the one discovered in the forest, details an accidental death, Ryan, followed by panic. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. F said no one would get hurt if I cooperated, but R fell, hit his head on the corner of the table. So much blood. F says we can't let T and A go home now. They saw everything. Says it would ruin us both. What have I done? What am I going to do? The journal reveals Frank convinced Derek they needed to silence the other children who witnessed the accident. What began as exploitation and abuse escalated to murder when Ryan's death threatened exposure. Most disturbing, evidence indicates Derek later threatened to confess, leading to his own disappearance, likely at Frank's hands. Your husband was both perpetrator and victim, Vale explains gently. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it helps explain the dynamics. Frank Delaney was the experienced predator who found vulnerable men like Derek and pulled them into his world, then eliminated them when they became liabilities. Forensic evidence from the cabin matches what was found at the original discovery site, confirming the children died here before their remains were moved. Specialists estimate they survived several days after Ryan's death, days documented in Derek's increasingly desperate journal entries as he struggled between Frank's influence and his own collapsing moral framework. For Laura, the knowledge that her children spent their final days afraid, confused, and betrayed by their own fathers and Schwanendars almost unbearable. Yet there is a terrible clarity in finally knowing, in having concrete answers after decades of questions. I always thought not knowing was the worst pain possible, she tells Vale. I was wrong. Knowing is worse, but it's also necessary. As the investigation team prepares to leave the cabin, a radio call comes through. Frank Delaney has been located. Not running, not hiding, but sitting calmly at Laura's kitchen table on Maple Street, waiting as though for an overdue reckoning that he always knew would eventually come. He went home, Vale realizes. After all this, he went back to where it started. The forest has given up its dead, revealed its secrets, and illuminated 3 decades of darkness. Now the final confrontation must occur where the tragedy began, on Maple Street, where 3 children once rode their bikes on a summer evening and disappeared forever. Frank Delaney sits in an interrogation room, now an elderly man, but with the same watchful eyes that once observed Maple Street's children. Detective Vale conducts the interview while Laura observes from behind one-way glass, coming face to face with the man who destroyed her family but pretended for years to be her only friend. "I protected that neighborhood," Frank says calmly, as if discussing community service rather than predatory violence. "I kept its secrets. All of them. Not just mine." People knew, Detective. They saw things, heard things, suspected things. But they looked away because the truth was inconvenient. He speaks of Derek with something like contempt. A weak man, easily manipulated, ultimately disposable. He describes the night of Ryan's accidental death without emotion, recounting the subsequent murders of Tyler and Anna as logical necessities rather than monstrous acts. Most chilling is his genuine belief that his actions were ultimately for the community's benefit, to preserve Maple Street's illusion of safety and prosperity. In his twisted logic, he was the guardian of a certain kind of order, eliminating threats to the neighborhood's carefully maintained facade. "I watched you grieve for 30 years, he tells Laura through the glass, somehow knowing she's there despite not being able to see her. I was there for every tear, every breakdown, every moment of despair. No one else saw what I saw. No one else cared enough to stay." His pride in this long-term deception is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of his confession, the satisfaction he derived from not just committing the crimes, but from inserting himself into Laura's life afterward, watching her suffering with hidden knowledge. The interrogation reveals the full scope of the tragedy: an accident covered up, then murders to hide the cover-up, then more deaths to protect the murderer. A cascade of horror that began with exploitation and ended with bodies in the forest, all while a community chose not to see the warning signs in their midst. After Frank is led away to await trial, Laura McConnell returns to her home on Maple Street one last time. As new families watch from their porches, children playing in the same yards where her own once laughed, she places a "for sale" sign in her front lawn. Some secrets have been unearthed. Some justice has been served. But Maple Street will always carry the whispers of what happened that summer evening. The neighborhood has changed. New houses, new families, new stories. But the lesson remains beneath the surface, a warning for those willing to see it. Evil doesn't always lurk in forests. Sometimes it lives next door and waves hello each morning. The monster isn't the stranger in the shadows, but the familiar face bringing casseroles and comfort, watching and waiting behind a mask of neighborly concern. As Laura drives away from Maple Street for the final time, she passes the forest edge where 3 bicycles were found 30 years ago. The trees stand silent, no longer harboring secrets but serving as witnesses to a truth finally brought into the light. The children of Maple Street are found at last. Not alive, as Laura once hoped in the early days of searching, but found nonetheless, named, known, and finally able to rest in the truth that can no longer be buried.